Good evening and welcome to the September 23rd, 2019 Council Work Session. And I just want to open by saying to everyone that I'm really glad to be back. I've been gone too long and I missed too many meetings, and grateful to Councilor Taylor for stepping in as presiding officer while I was gone, and happy to be back. So thank you all for your forbearance. And the first item is just committee reports and items of interest. I know that Emily has one. Anybody else? Betty? Anybody else? Claire? Okay, take it away, Emily.
Thank you. I am on 3 commissions, and they all meet Thursday, Tuesday, Wednesday, so here's the report. The Mackenzie Watershed Council, we talked about Lane County's floodplain code, and guess what? Eugene isn't included in that, so no problems. They are having a salmon celebration September 28th from 10 to 3 at the Mackenzie Community Track and Field in Blue River. And they are also having, you can see active spawning at Finn Rock. So that sounds like fun. Human Rights Commission, we approved a request for closed captioning at the Transponder Gala fundraiser, which will be October 11th at the Unitarian Church. The idea being that not everybody who is deaf or hard of hearing does ASL, so the closed captioning will make it more available for more people. We went over their work plans, which they have 4 basic groups: the We See You for marginalized people, Homeless and Poverty Advisory, and Education Outreach and Public Engagement. And they will be here on the 14th of October to present that plan and give us the report from last year. And I have something to say at. I wrote this down so I would get it just right. At the Human Rights Commission meeting last Tuesday evening, I used the word terrorism. If I had pre-written my remarks, I would have chosen a different word. I apologize. I also mixed up the EZA Market, which has an unrented apartment above it, and Albies, who sells gyros. I'm sorry. The Sustainability Commission, we saw a presentation on the carbon-free challenge. You can go online and sign up. Takes a little bit of time to put in where you are with your habits, and you get a score. And then there's all these things you can do to make your score better. You can be in groups and have teams. And, you know, every little bit counts. You get to see how much carbon you've saved from what you're doing. So I really encourage people to look at it. It's very educational. It could make a difference, and it's fun. Yay. We talked about a resolution in support of the youth-led climate strike last Friday and this week, which I will bring to council, and I hope we can take some action after our next public forum, not this one coming up. We also looked at their work plans. They're had committees for food waste, CAP 2 strategies on both transportation, greenhouse gases, and buildings, and air quality. And that are my reports. Thank you.
Great. Betty.
Thank you. People continue to be very concerned about 5G, and I know we're having a work session on October 9th, and we've been told that one thing we have some control over is aesthetic things, and I wonder if we can ask people to have things undone. On my street, there is where an extra pole has been put up, a very ugly pole with a big ugly contraption on it, and right beside another pole, and just a few feet from someone's front door. And I think that is aesthetic, and that is a part of what we can do. And so I wonder, can we order things undone after a while? Could we get some information about that at our work session? Thank you.
Yes.
That's all. Thank you.
Claire.
Thank you. So I serve on the Lane Area Commission on Transportation, which is, as it is named, an area commission on transportation. That involves stakeholders and jurisdictions from around the county. And Folks may not know that the Oregon Transportation Commission has recently named a new director who still needs to be, I believe, confirmed by the Senate and then verified by the governor. So there's still some process, but I just wanted to share. The incoming director is a gentleman named Chris Strickler, who's worked for the agency for just under 2 years, and before that worked up for Washington ODOT. So I don't think there was a lot of press around this, but we do have a new director of ODOT, which is an opportunity for us to be thinking about some of our work around climate recovery goals and transportation innovation that we are trying to prepare for here in Eugene. And so I just wanted to draw the public's attention to the fact that there is now a new director of a very powerful agency in Oregon. And hopefully, I'm keeping my fingers crossed that that bodes well for some innovation and future vision for our transportation system in Oregon. Thank you.
Okay, Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. I attended last week. I serve on the executive board for the Lane Workforce Partnership, and we had a meeting last week. We did a number of things that were really budgetarily oriented, with moving things around and compensating with unemployment so massively low right now and historically low. That has an effect on their budget stream and on their compensation, which is based in some grants and funding streams on the number of people that they get to serve. And with unemployment being so low, that's kind of affected that. So we've made some moves to help with that. The staff have, and we passed all of those. Myself and a couple other board members have also encouraged them for some time now. It's to consider some more work that Christina Payne, their executive director, agrees with and has been doing, to work more closely with the Bureau of Labor and Industry, which oddly enough, the state's Workforce Partnership Board is not located under the Bureau of Labor and Industry, which one might think was a natural combination. But with the commissioner being from Eugene, that has led to a more comfortable partnership there. And they're working, Christina Payne and Val Hoyle are working very closely together to try and align some of their programs, especially around apprenticeship programs and that sort of thing. So I think it's going to lead to some new opportunities for workforce training in our area. And I think it's really good work. So I wanted to call them out and say, good job.
Great. Jennifer.
Thank you. So Alan and I both serve on the Police Commission, and one of the goals of the commission has been to find some places where we can have meetings outside of police headquarters, because not everyone feels comfortable there. And so tentatively, I have 4 locations, and I just want to share with people, you can find all this on the website, on the city website. Just look for Eugene Police Commission. But in November, we will be at Peterson. We meet the second Thursday of every month at 5:30. So in November, we will be at Peterson Barn. In January, at the Sheldon Community Center. In April, at the Hilliard Community Center. And then in July, at the Atrium Building. And then the rest of the meetings, if I didn't mention them, will be in our normal location at EPD. So we're going to try this out, see how it goes, see what people think, if they like it. So we hope to get feedback from folks if that was better for them. They prefer it to be an EPD. That's it.
Right. That sounds great, actually. Anybody else who didn't? I just want to say on a more less serious note that I participated in the Sunday Streets and Eugene Parade on Sunday, and it was really a terrific parade. I thought they did a great job organizing it. It was really fun despite the rain, and just a kind of bringing back that feeling of Eugene celebration that came in that parade. It was quirky, and people were out there on their slickers, ukulele players with slickers over their ukuleles, and it was really great. So thanks to the staff that pulled that together and the volunteers, because really fun. Okay, ready for the first item. Oh, I have to close the city council because our first item is a urban renewal agency. Closing the city council meeting and opening the meeting of the Eugene Urban Renewal Agency for a discussion about the riverfront.
Good evening, Mayor, City Councilors. My name is Michael Kennison. I'm with Community Development Division, and I'm here with my colleagues Emily Proudfoot with the Parks Division and Will Dowdy also with Community Development. And we're here to talk to you about the downtown riverfront development as well as a proposed revision to the Williams and Dame concept plan. Emily's going to get us started off talking about all the activity on the riverfront. So if you haven't noticed, there's been a lot going on the riverfront, and it doesn't look like it did 6 months ago. And then Will's going to get into the details of the concept plan. And then we have a proposed motion in your packet, so you're queued up to take action this evening if you choose to do so. Before I turn it over to Emily, I just also want to flag that this is the first of a series of conversations that we're going to be having with you related to urban renewal, both downtown and riverfront. Beginning mid-October, we're going to come and take kind of a big look with you at the downtown and the riverfront projects. We have more design work in and a better sense of costs, and there's a lot of complicated moving parts with those districts, so we want to kind of step back, give you an overview, find out from you kind of what other questions and information you'd like to have, and then we're going to have a series of other work sessions that get specifically into the details of Town Square, the riverfront, and the steam plant. So there's more to come. Okay, with that, I'll turn it over to Emily.
Good evening, Mayor and Councilors. Thanks for having me. I'm Emily Proudfoot, and I'm the project manager for the Downtown Riverfront Park. And I'm here to share some updates on what's happened on the site this last summer and how things are progressing on the ground at Riverfront. And in short, there's just a lot has changed. Let's see here. Okay. Do I have a pointer? The red one? It was going? Oh, there it is. Okay, wonderful. This is a series of both aerial and on-the-ground photos that we've taken over the summer, and it's a pretty good remote tour. But eventually, we hope to get you all out there to see this work in person. It's pretty transformative. So these images were captured by Paul Gordon, who works in natural areas and parks and open space, and he's been doing a fantastic job of tracking the process through drone imagery. And so he's given us some great befores and durings, and we'll have lots more to come. I think they'll be great. So this summer's construction contract combined work on the redevelopment site and the park site together, and we did something called mass grading. So mass grading means that we moved dirt all over the site in a prescribed manner to get subgrade elevations for future streets and utilities and park development. So subgrade is the base level from which we build everything up. So if you went out to the site, you might feel like you were standing a little low on the ground, like maybe you weren't really at the future street level, and that's on purpose because we have a lot of pipes and paving to do and lawn and new soil to bring in and things like that. So in this slide, so this is before, and then if we add, there we go. So in this slide, I think, one of the biggest changes is that we took, the first thing we did was we took all the asphalt off the site. So that was just removed and either repurposed to some degree. And then we did a lot of site clearing. So most notably here, the electrical parts building is now demolished and gone. And in this particular photo, you can also see the riverbank being laid back here, and we'll see some more of that. As we go through these photos, just keep the electrical tower in mind because it's a great point of reference visually as we kind of fly around the site. Let's see. This is a view of the site from the river. So one of my favorite things about this photo is that if we go to the next one, is that this Hall Road right here is the future Fifth Avenue. And so when you stand on site and you stand at the end of this road, you can see out to the river where our park pavilion will be, and you can look back up through under the viaduct up Fifth Avenue down to these trees over here because they've also removed this railroad wall. So you really get a sense of where you are in space now, and this idea of us, reaching back into the city and the city coming to the river. You can stand at 4th and High now and look down to the river and see the vegetation. You can't see the water because it's too low, but so that's pretty exciting. Also in these photos, you'll notice we have there's a vegetative buffer along the bank, so we're not doing any water work below ordinary high water. So there's a solid buffer there, and we've been able, once we cleared a lot of the non-native vegetation out of that area, we were much better able to see, which trees were suffering, which we wanted to take, and we made some choices in the field about saving some additional ones. So it's been a great process to really open up some views, take out a lot of bad vegetation, and then from here, the existing bank where we're not laying it back, the existing bank to remain, we're going to remove all the non-natives from there and plant them with over 20,000 native plants and plugs this winter. So you'll see more planting work that's going to happen. So this next slide is, there I am on the site pointing down towards something important. I don't know what, but there's been lots of consultation on site. So when we laid the bank back, we dug out about 10,000 yards of soil. So that's 1,000 dump trucks of soil that we placed in other areas on the site. And so the top of bank is much further away from the bank now, and we have a much gentler slope. And so what we did was we put down this fabric, and then on top of that, this first layer of riprap. So it looks a little rough right now, but this is not the final condition. This is engineered so that if we get a flood, the bank doesn't run away. But the next phase of work, once we're done with all the park development work, we'll come back with another layer of soil-choked riprap, and that entire site will be green with native plants when we're done. So it'll look a lot more native and lush. But I like this picture also. You can see the manhole here. This was where finished grade was. So this is the manhole that goes down to the mill race outfall right here. And so it's just sticking up in the air. And so you can see how far we've taken away dirt. Let's see here. Here's another drone view looking back towards Skinner Butte, so you can get that view back toward 4th and High. And then from there, looking back from 4th and High toward the river. If you go down there, I just drove by there a couple of hours ago, and this is this enormous pile of compost on site. So they're spreading that all over the site now for the winter, and they're going to seed it with compost. So the whole site will actually turn green, which is exciting. I also like this photo because, again, you can see this Fifth Avenue connection here, back up to the railroad crossing here at 4th and High. And then we'll also be hydroseeding at the top of this bank with native seed. Also, I think in this photo, you can't see it very well, but the bike path is going to come around the backside of the tower here, along the top of the new bank, and then come back together in front of the headquarters building. So we'll also have an overlook here, although not right out to the edge of the river, and then all the way out here. So and then here's some views. This machinery was not going when I took these pictures, but I like pictures of big equipment moving big rocks because that means we're doing a really wonderful and amazing project to the degree that we haven't done before, and that's a really exciting thing. So here's the updated site plan. We were going to have an overlook at the electrical tower, but there's quite a bit of utility conflicts here. So there's a sort of deck overlook here now. So we still have the big multimodal path. Again, this plaza area will be a second phase of work that I think we'll likely pursue shortly after 2021. And then here's the overlook pavilion, and then we have another overlook here. So everything is moving along according to plan, and I should have a 90% set of construction drawings by next Monday, and we plan to bid the project at the end of the year, and then we should be starting construction by February, March next year. So hopefully by this time next year, you'll see a largely completed park, which is amazing. I have to give our project team an enormous amount of credit. They've done a ton of work in a very short amount of time. So with that, I'll turn it over to Will to talk about development plan updates.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to highlight the key differences for you to notice between the current plan and what we've got proposed for you tonight. These differences generally fall into two categories. On one part, you've got the form of the building, and on the other hand, you've got what goes into them. And I think it's helpful to keep those separate. So beginning with the form, the current plan has been to build parcels 7, 9, and 10. So you can see 7, 9, and 10 moving down. The current plan has been to build those without any structured parking, that is, with a combination of tuck-under parking and surface parking. This proposed revision reintroduces structured parking within each of these parcels, and the result is a more urban development pattern. Not only is the structured parking more easily masked from public view than the surface parking would be, but it also increases the amount of parking that's possible, which in turn allows for more capacity for residential units and other uses. Those are the lots I meant to show you before. Okay, so here you can see an early concept for the ground floor plan. This is parcel 9. The other two parcels would be similar to this. What you can see is that the parking sits at the middle of the building, and there's a combination of apartments and non-residential spaces that surrounds it. And so that's where you get this this non-residential space as, or this usable space as the public interface to the building. The increase in parking as well as its configuration into larger structures presents an opportunity for shared parking. So this can serve the park and commercial uses during the day as well as serving the residents at night. And in parcel 9, you can see the orange space, the darker orange space on the upper left side. This is also an opportunity for new retail space that's adjacent to the plaza. So instead of splitting parcels 9 and 10 into two different development sites, that's 9A and 9B, 10A and 10B as you see on the left, this takes advantage of the efficiency of a single parking core for each of these parcels. In order to maintain natural lighting and ventilation, the buildings that are built on these then split into two parts as you go up. And so I've got a section for you right here. This is, here you can see the parking in the middle, and there's a courtyard space on top. And then on the left side, along the railroad tracks, you get that taller 7-story piece. On the park side, on the right, you get a shorter 4-story piece. And so that's the kind of way that you would elevate this up as it gets built. Here you can see a 3-dimension view of this. So parcels 10, 9, and 7 as you move across, and you can see how these buildings have this 2-part look. So it feels like it's a more complex development than just single monolithic structures. And then you can see where that green courtyard space is up at that 3rd level between the front and the back portions. You can also see the land use code at work. The tiered height is similar to the current plan because they're both consistent with the land use code. And I should note that all of the evolution that we're talking about today is consistent with the land use code that you recently passed. Here it is from another angle. This time what you can see is a little bit of compare and contrast. It's kind of hard to see the differences at first blush, but you can see that the current plan up on the upper left and the proposed plan on the bottom right, the principal differences is the heights of the buildings. The buildings along the park move from 3 to 4 stories. The buildings in the back move up a little bit. Okay, so from a building use standpoint, this plan has parcels 7, 9, and 10 as predominantly market rate residential. Parcel 7, which is highlighted here on the left, had been identified as either market rate housing or a hotel. Now that option moves up to housing 3 with or it's proposed for parcel 3 near 5th and High. Similarly, the current plan has the affordable housing at 10A, and the plan proposes to put that at parcel 3 as well in a different corner of that property. This is a location that puts the affordable housing closer to transit and other services, is also more protected from railroad noise. Also, the townhomes that were proposed along the park are replaced by flats that are part of those larger structures. The rearrangement of these building programs makes parcels 7 and 9 the starting point for the construction, more closely aligning with the vertical build-out, more closely aligning the vertical build-out with that of the park development. And Williams and Dame is projecting a fall 2020 start date. I should also note that the timeline for the affordable housing project remains the same one way or the other. The added parking and building height allows for more residential density, whereas the current plan anticipates a total of about 340 residential units across the entire site. This new concept increases that number to about 500 on just these 3 parcels, 7, 9, and 10, by themselves. So from 340 to 500 on just the 3. This compact urban development also aligns with the goals and strategies of the downtown plan, Envision Eugene, and Housing Tools and Strategies. It offers a larger population base to be in and around the new Riverfront Park on a daily basis, and supporting the retail and restaurants, including the steam plant. And now I'll hand it back to Mike.
So just to reiterate some of the outcomes, Will's, I think, touched on all of these. It's a more compact urban development form, something more akin to bringing the downtown to the riverfront. That will result in more people there on the riverfront to generate the positive activity that we're looking for, that our public spaces will benefit from, as well as retail and other commercial uses there. The restaurant, more people to visit there, more people to visit the steam plant. The accelerated timeline that's for a development that's in proximity to the park, the shared parking, a little more retail, the affordable housing in what we think is a preferred location. And then finally, what I'd like to note is that the investment by Williams and Dame significantly increases with this under this proposal. Previously, it was estimated to be about $100 million investment on the part of Williams and Dame for the total project. And on these 3 parcels, 7, 9, and 10, it's alone or $115 million investment on their part. And so that feels good to us in terms of leveraging the dollars that we're putting in, the public dollars from the Urban Renewal Agency. And I'd note that there's no increase in cost to the agency under this proposal as well. The river guides were presented with the proposed changes to the concept plan on September 19th, and they voted unanimously to recommend approval of the revised concept plan. And then this concludes our presentation. So we're asking you to consider a motion that would authorize the agency director to move forward in revising the DDA consistent with the proposed revisions to the concept plan. And we'll take your questions.
Great, thank you. Questions have Emily. Take it away, Emily.
Thank you. You guys are working fast. That's nice with the construction costs. I'm glad to see it. Could you go to slide number 6 and use the pointer to show me where the park is, the plaza part of the park? It's way back there.
Is this the one you want?
No, way back, way back. It's a picture, it's a photo.
Photos?
6, page
Go back
6.
to 6.
There, that one.
Okay, I will show you where the plaza will be. So the park, let me get my pointer. There it is. Okay, the park is here. Here's 5th. There's a future restaurant here. And so the plaza is just about right in here. Something like that.
Great.
And extends a little bit this way, Counselor.
Great.
Yeah.
I'm really excited about all those native plants this winter. That's go CRO and beauty. The extended 5th Street is looking good. I can imagine seeing down there, and when I usually walk over to eWeb, it's big, squirrely, unhappy path. And now that I see the excavation, I like the way there's more riverbank and gentler and places for floods.
Yes, and habitat and
The
birds.
habit, I mean, I really do,
Yeah.
as I'm seeing that change, I really like it. And then to the next part, you're off the hook. I don't like the new plan as much as the old plan, but I'm okay with it. These are the things I don't like. It looks a lot like the university. It looks like dorms to me. Kind of like the night campus. It just feels like the ivory towers are coming this way right onto the park. So as the design is fleshed out, let's just make it a little different than the university. I'm concerned that with all that market rate housing, that's who's going to live there is the night campus people. I would, if I could. And that all that market rate right on the river is going to be very exclusive. And I think it's going to be really important to put emphasis on the restaurant being affordable to everyone, or at least parts of it, and the retail, so a broad variety of people will feel welcome. The taller height also puts more of a wall between it and the city. I love the structured parking. Everybody gets windows on both sides. And I think those river guides, I don't know why they get their meetings in a raft and we're here. But how does this affect Mupti? Since they've changed their housing around, how is this going to affect Mupti?
Well, it doesn't change they were always intending to apply for MUPTI, and they had multiple multifamily projects that would be eligible. So under this scenario, it's really the same situation. So these projects would be eligible for a MUPTI application.
But they've increased the numbers of units, so will that increase the ask?
So the tax exemption would change based on the estimated projected tax from each project. So yes, that will change.
Well, I would like to be kept apprised of how that's going.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else with questions? Claire?
No questions, but some comments, and I appreciate all of Councilor Simple's comments. Overall, I'm fine with the new concept plan. Staff has mentioned, that it will raise the building heights, and that creates a more urban environment, and I think some folks in our community will think that's a great thing, and other folks will not. So I think it's kind of a mixed opinion there. But I think in practical terms, it results in better overall use of limited space. And I like the fact that it's going to result in building more housing units and getting us moving more towards our goal of what we said in Envision Eugene in terms of what we needed and more housing units. And the folks who come to work at the night campus going to have to live somewhere. So it is, I think it's, accurate speculation that this might be a landing spot for some of them. But I'm also really pleased, actually, that the new concept creates additional parking spaces. I know other councilors had shared real concern around the parking for the whole project, and the steam plant has parking needs. And I think that the idea of shared parking really represents an opportunity for us as a city to do some innovation in that area that I don't know that we've really done. And I know other cities have when they've, had redevelopment of underutilized buildings in their downtown core, and they've found a way to come up with shared parking agreements that really benefited both the people who lived in the housing there and the people who came to work in the businesses. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about how we're going to help make that happen once we get to that point. So those are my comments. Thanks.
Chris?
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate the proposal. I think what they want to do works fine. I think it's a trade that actually, in some respects, comes out more positive, not just in terms of the money, which is more, but also in terms of how you're going to do things. I also like the parking, the fact that the parking has been acknowledged and accommodated as part of this major development. I think that's really important. And interestingly, I think the question of density is a good one. We do want more people downtown, and this will represent an increase in density. And while we do that, you don't want it to become ugly and aesthetically, not pleasing. But anytime you increase density, you're going to increase the building mass. So figuring out ways to increase the mass and still have it be attractive, I think, will be desirable. But I actually like the fact that you can get more people in that area. I think overall, the increasing density will help, which really leads to another point that Emily made, which I thought was a good one, is you don't want this area to become exclusively posh. And so I think one of the ways you do that is to create destinations for everybody. I think the plaza and some of the other park amenities will help to create a destination for anybody in Eugene who wants to go there. But also I think the steam plant, and part of the intent of the steam plant, I think, is also to create a destination where people would want to go. So it's not just, I only go there because I live there in my apartment. It's, I also go there because there's a steam plant. I also go there because there's a plaza. I also go there because there's a river. And so I think the more we can emphasize and encourage those kinds of universal destinations, I think will really help the area to become much more in alignment with many different populations in Eugene and not just one or two. At least that's my hope for the area. And I think the way you have it planned out now, I think that can be achieved. We just have to make sure we keep that in mind. But otherwise, I think the plan is great, and I'm perfectly happy to support the motion.
Alan?
Yeah, thanks for bringing this forward. I was wondering when they were going to get to parking. Seems a little, like it took a while to get there, but this makes a lot more sense to me with regard to the way that they're doing the parking and the way that these are configured and the cost effectiveness of very expensive parking structures by combining the units makes a lot of sense to me too. And this is more dense and a better use of the land. I share the concerns that other counselors had. In the EIS, it said the overall increase in housing goes from 340 to 500. It seems to imply that that's only in parcels 7, 9, and 10. What happens to the affordable housing number of units in 3?
No, nothing changes there. Nothing's being proposed there. So there's still a commitment in the DDA to build, I think it was up to 75 affordable housing units. Yep.
Okay,
So that's not being proposed to change.
okay. And the proposed construction start of that was not at the same time as the original part. It's kind of like phase 2.
Correct. All the parcels 7, 9, 10 were going to be in a later timeline for development. Previously, they were proposing to start on around parcel 3, which is on Mill and 4th and 5th, that area. This shifts now down to parcels 7 or 9. The affordable housing timeline doesn't change. In the DDA, there's a commitment that construction must commence by July of 22, and if not, then we have a repurchase right.
Repurchase of that parcel.
Correct.
Right, okay. Right. And this doesn't seem to change at all the park footprint. It's just a different.
No, the park footprint stays the same. And I think one of the other things around the timing that's pretty nice is that it coincides better with potential plaza construction, and so that we'll have more density or more housing. You know, I wasn't sure when we would have buildings around the plaza in the previous plan, because we were starting, more in the north corner. So I think this is like for the park, just bringing people to the park and having eyes on the park on a regular basis. I think this is a really positive, just timing switch.
Right. Otherwise, it was going to be an open field for a while.
Maybe, yeah.
Or open hardscape.
Yeah.
In that case. All right. Thanks.
Any other comments? I have two comments. One is that I actually really like the idea that the affordable housing has moved up and closer to services and roads. I think that's a quality of life improvement for the folks who will live there, and I'm really glad to see that change. The other thing is that you had mentioned that the streets, that one of the advantages of this reconfiguration is the streets that cut through from the railway to the river will be more like shared use streets, and maybe you could just expand upon that a little bit for a minute. Sure.
So that's one of the things that we're looking at right here. You can see in the current concept, in order to get access to these townhouses on 9B and 10B, and to get around to the back of the housing on 9A and 10A, we had these short substreets that go towards the park, and then they access private alleys and their parking access as well. What we have the opportunity to do is to get the access to the parking in these larger 9 and 10 off of what we've been calling Railroad Avenue here, which means that the use of these shorter streets now is really limited to the vehicle use is limited to emergency vehicles and maybe service vehicles, and might be an opportunity to turn those into shared use paths that really become an extension of the park all the way out to that primary street. So that's something that we're looking into to make sure that it works from all the technical standpoint, but that seems like an opportunity to make the park come a little bit closer into the city and be a more visible way for people to find the river.
Thank you. So are we ready to put a motion on the table?
Okay. I move to authorize the agency director to amend the disposition and development agreement consistent with the proposed changes in attachment A.
Second.
Any other questions, comments? All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. None opposed. Thank you very much. That's great. Wonderful report. And that closes the meeting of the Urban Renewal Agency, and we reopen as a city council meeting.
Good to see you, Glenn.
Okay. Thank you.
Whenever you're ready.
Good evening, Mayor and Councilors. My name is Lydia Kay with the Building and Permit Services Division, and I'm here to discuss short-term rentals, which was an item the council requested we come back and talk with you about. So this evening, we'll talk about how we deal with short-term rentals in Eugene, the benefits and the challenges as we've learned about them through the research. We'll take a look at what 4 other cities in Oregon have done and look at options for local regulations if the council is interested in going that way. And then we'll talk about what the process is and a potential direction for council to move forward with. And of course, we'll leave lots of time for questions and discussion. So currently in Eugene, short-term rentals, and this is consistent with the way that they're looked at generally, are rentals that are available for 30 days or less. They are permitted in our residential zones, and you may recall there was recently a challenge to our interpretation, and we were upheld at the Land Conservation and Development Commission that the way that we're regulating them, that they're a permitted residential use. They must meet the definition of family, so that means that no more than 5 unrelated people can share a single-family dwelling at any point in time. They do pay transient room tax that is collected through the platforms and then goes to our finance department, and that's used in our cultural services division. Currently, we don't have a requirement for a permit or a license. And according to Booking.com, there are 823 vacation rentals in Eugene, though we expect that there are likely more than that. Oopsie. So this is a map that shows the distribution of short-term rentals in Eugene. It's important to note that this is not to scale, so this doesn't represent the amount of housing in Eugene that is occupied by short-term rentals. It really is just to get an idea of the distribution. You can see at the top right the different platforms that are represented here. We'll talk about this in a few minutes, but one of the questions that comes up with regards to short-term rentals is how they impact housing availability. So please note that the research that we've seen shows that there's approximately 1 to 2% of Eugene's housing is in short-term rentals. So again, that's not to scale. Potential benefits, increased tourism, adding jobs to the local economy, and this is largely in terms of servicing the short-term rentals. They can provide supplemental income for people who may have had a recent change in their life so that they need a way to bring in additional funding to make their mortgage payments. It's said to provide a local experience for visitors so they can actually live in the neighborhoods, and they do contribute again to transient room tax. Potential challenges, so livability issues are often raised, and these are things like noise, trash, parking. There's also a sense in some places that short-term rentals change the character of the neighborhood because the people there are more transitory rather than having your regular neighbors all the time. Occupancy can be a problem, that there are more people who are living in the house than is permitted or safe per the building code. I would note that the livability issues and occupancy are things that we have other code sections that can address. So obviously, trash, having more than 5 people in a single-family dwelling, those are things that our code compliance staff are able to respond to. The transient room tax collection can be a challenge because there are several people who do short-term rentals without actually going through a platform, and so those taxes aren't necessarily collected unless they're self-reporting. Again, the question of whether the housing inventory, this is a big discussion, and the research shows in some places the answer is yes, it does impact the inventory of housing, and in other places less so. But I think there's no doubt that there is some impact, even if it is a small one, on the availability of housing. And then enforcement can be a challenge. Much of the people are living there, they're renting these places in the evening or over the weekend, so when some of the complaints are happening, we're not able to respond because our compliance staff aren't available. So now, as I said, we'll take a look at what a few 4 cities are doing. There's also, in addition to the 4 slides I'll go through, there is a handout, blue graph at the bottom of your materials that gives a little bit more detail and lets you see the information in comparison. So the City of Bend has a variety of options in terms of how they license and regulate them, everything from just a license to requiring a land use permit. Owner occupancy is required for those homes that are just licensed. If the owner is not there, then you need to go through a conditional use permit process. There is a requirement for 1 parking space per bedroom. This was the only city that we found that there was a separation limit. So there's a 200-foot separation between short-term rentals if they're not owner occupied. And they do have a requirement for inspections. The City of Portland requires neighborhood notice. That's not neighborhood approval, but you have to let your neighbors know if you're going to be doing that. Again, there is an owner occupancy required in all instances. The process for approval depends on the number of bedrooms, whether there's 2 or fewer or 3 to 5 bedrooms rented out. There is not a specified parking requirement in their code, and there is a guest registry required. And so that's a way that the platforms don't report where these are located, and so having a guest registry is a way that you can see what the addresses are that are being used for short-term rentals. So the City of Ashland had some interesting regulations. They actually limit them to within 200 feet of certain streets. These are the larger streets, the collectors and arterials. Owner occupancy is required in all instances. They do require a land use process for all of the short-term rental approvals. Again, they have one parking space per accommodation, and inspections are also required. Finally, in the city of Salem, again, they require a guest registry and also to have a local representative so that if there are issues or complaints, that there is someone locally that you can contact to address them. Owner occupancy is required without a conditional use permit. Again, one parking space per guest room, and there is a requirement for inspections. So in the agenda item summary, and also on the slide here, there's a range of options that the city council can consider. There may be a benefit in having a conversation about what kinds of issues the council would like to see addressed, and then the regulations could be tailored to that. Again, we talked about these in the previous slides. Owner occupancy was something that we saw across the board, and that's not just in Oregon, but also across the country. Having a guest registry and a local contact was not something that every city required, but that seems to make a lot of sense to us. There are limited rental periods and durations, so some places only allow them to be rented out for, say, 90 days a year. The separation requirements, again, we only saw that in Bend. Inspections, I would note that that is something that we did see in some of the cities. It would be a pretty significant resource issue for us to have to do those inspections. And I would also note that we don't do inspections for long-term rentals or other types of lodging facilities. There's also in some places, and the city of Portland recently won a lawsuit to require the online platforms that Portland recently won a lawsuit with Airbnb so that they have to report the address, the location, the number of bedrooms, et cetera, through the platform. If they don't, then they cannot issue a permit. And in the article that we read that was just recently written about this, it's pretty recent this happened, they expect that actually 1,500 short-term rental units will be taken off the market because of that. So again, as I mentioned, we thought that we could propose a potential starting point for the city. I know that Councilor Taylor has made a motion. We thought that in terms of getting something off the ground relatively quickly, we could look at regulating the short-term rentals through our existing business license program, so we do that through Chapter 3. We would recommend that there be an owner occupancy requirement. Some of the concerns that we've heard are that people from out of town or out of state purchase homes and use them for short-term rentals, and essentially they become hotels, so that would be a way to address that. The guest registry and local contact, again, provides a means for people to address the concerns as they're coming, and also provides us some of that data. And then we also could pretty straightforwardly limit the number of days per year if that was something the council is interested in. Again, the process is just to amend our Chapter 3 and adopt a business licensure program for short-term rentals. And that would require, at a minimum, we have a public hearing before the city council, before the council would then deliberate and could adopt any new regulations. That concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions, hear the discussion.
Thank you very much. Very informative and very helpful breakdown and chart. I really appreciate that. I have Betty and Alan in the queue, and I'm going to call on Betty first, but I am just going to ask, Betty does have a motion, but I would like us to have a general discussion first before we discuss her specific motion. So I'm going to reserve time at the end of the meeting for your motion. I promised you I would do that, and I will do that. So let's have a general conversation, and then we can review the motion. So.
Okay, I won't make the motion now. But it's really good that we're discussing this now before it becomes a huge problem, as it has in some communities. I recommend that to many of you read the article in the New Yorker in April about Barcelona. That isn't near here, but I've talked with the mayor of Hood River, who said they've done a lot of damage there. The two biggest things I see are the damage to livability of the neighborhood from having strangers come and go all the time. It's be hard to get to know your neighbors and to establish a kind of neighborhood relationship and sharing. And the other big thing is, which is it's been a big problem in Hood River, is the destruction of housing availability. The mayor of Hood River told me his children's teachers can't live there now because so much of the possible housing that people could rent is being used for short-term rentals. So I think that we really do need to have some restrictions before it becomes too difficult to do it. I know when, in my neighborhood, when people have a lot of people coming and going, it changes the character of the neighborhood, and it changes the availability of parking. If people want to have company, there's no place for them. If there are, and I think that my motion includes most of the things I was thinking of, but there are probably things I didn't think of. But I think that if you don't have a parking requirement, it makes it difficult for the people who live there. And there's more noise and you don't know, it's really good to know your neighbors, and you don't know your neighbors if people are coming and going all the time. And I know since I started thinking about this, I've heard from people who say short-term rentals are ruining their neighborhoods, and I've heard from people who say I couldn't live without doing short-term rentals. I couldn't continue to pay my mortgage. So I know there are two sides to it. Thank you. I'll make my motion later.
Thank you. Alan?
Yeah, this has been a kind of percolating issue for a long time. I remember bringing it up about 2 years ago and surveying the council, and most people weren't really interested in bringing it up at that point because if you looked at slide 4, where they distribute it, it's mostly around the U of O, and it's the proximity to the University of Oregon, and it's stuff that's mostly where most of the rentals are. And I think that it's expanded beyond that, but that's been the big issue. I think the biggest issue for me is the livability and the impact on neighborhoods. I don't really have any problem at all with homeowners renting a room and supplementing their income and doing that on a regular basis, or in the area around the university during big track meets, for instance, people move out for a week or 2 weeks and rent their house. I don't have any problems with that. What I do have a problem with is the issue that has becoming a problem, which is people buying homes in neighborhoods exclusively to rent these out as Airbnbs or short-term rentals 365 days a year and never setting foot in them or being owner occupied at all. It basically is turning a neighborhood into a business area. And it's, I think, having a bigger impact on livability in terms of parking and the transient nature of it. And it's not what's intended to occur within those homes. So that I think is the issue that I want to deal with. I have a couple other questions. When we're talking about limiting the number of days per year, what have other folks done? I know some people do like no more than, well, what have other folks done?
The most common ones seem to be 90 days per year.
Total.
Total.
Okay.
Which also coincides with, if owner occupancy is something that the council is interested in, then owner occupancy is usually defined as 9 months out of the year. So you live there 9 months out of the year, and then you're able to rent your home the other 3 months.
Okay. And then a lot of the folks had a differentiation between owner occupancy without a CUP, for instance. Can you explain that issue a little better? Or land use permit?
Right. It just, for whatever reason, they chose that higher standard that if the home wasn't going to be owner occupied, then there would be a conditional use permit process, which, as you know, is discretionary and looks at things like neighborhood compatibility. And with a conditional use permit, then you can add conditions of approval that can also be revoked if they're in violation of
Do we
that.
currently do anything like that? So if someone wanted to go, if we set a limit of 90 days per year and somebody wanted to go beyond that, and they applied to have it be a business and be a 365-day-year short-term rental, could they do that within applying for a conditional use permit today? Or right now, we don't regulate it, so it's not
Right.
an issue.
It's not, no, we don't regulate it, so there isn't that path available. So that would be, and I would note that going down that path would actually require an amendment to Chapter 9, so that would be a different process than we were talking about. It would, you know what that process is.
Yeah.
Public process, go through the Planning Commission for recommendation before it comes back to you. So that would likely extend the timeline quite a bit.
Yeah, I also noticed the modest impact on the increase in rents and the increase in availability of housing prices, and also the availability of housing seem to be minor in most communities. But one of the things that interested me most was the TRT transit room tax, and how much of that, what percentage of them are actually, do we believe are actually reporting that and paying that transient room tax?
Well, it's difficult to answer because we don't know what we don't know, but actually, when some of the data that we saw, the city of Portland expected that they were only accounting for 26% of the short-term rentals, and I think the city of San Francisco was in a similar situation. So it really is a challenge to get all of the short-term rentals compliant.
So the ones that we capture are the ones that are in the Airbnbs, and those are captured, everybody else isn't, or potentially.
Do you need a second round?
Yeah, potentially.
Okay. Chris?
Thank you. I really appreciate the presentation. Trying to get some tangible information about short-term rentals, I think, is really helpful for me. I think getting a handle on it is a good idea, especially if it's going to be a growing area. And so I think some of the things you found out have been very helpful for me, and I think probably we should go down the road of looking to adopt some of those. And I think we can be very deliberate about that. Some of them we already have, we just need to enforce them more effectively. Others we might want to put in place. But one you mentioned specifically, and you implied it might be a challenge, was under the inspection requirements. Talk to me a little bit more about the challenges of trying to impose an inspection requirement.
Well, it really comes down to a challenge in terms of staffing. So we don't currently have, we have code compliance inspectors who are overworked as it is, so they're trying to keep up with their cases. If every time we had to go out and do an inspection, we would have to figure out a way to be able to pay for that. And there are a couple of different things that we're looking at in terms of inspections. Some cities actually go out and verify the number of rooms that are being rented. There's also some places inspect for things like fire life safety requirements. And again, the challenge, or just something to keep in mind, is we would be isolating that type of lodging use in terms of requiring inspections, because we don't require them for rental housing or other types of lodging. We don't go out and do inspections to verify those things. Some places, and it might be something we can look into further, have a self-certification in terms of the fire life safety inspection, saying that they have the appropriate number of, fire alarms, those types of things. So that would be something that would be less labor-intensive, certainly.
Okay, yeah, the labor part's useful, but the other part that you mentioned that would be significant for me is we're not requiring these kind of inspections with anything else. So why are we suddenly picking out this kind of housing when we don't do it with any other kind of housing? I think some sort of a system where they could report, or perhaps it would be something we could collect online or something like that might be helpful. But I don't think I want to isolate and suddenly pick out one type of housing when we don't do it with any other type, rental or otherwise. Seems to me to be kind of overreaching. So if we do get to the motion, I would discourage number 6. Perhaps we could substitute, instead of inspection requirements, is we might put in instead requiring a guest registry. I noticed in a couple of these areas, they do require them to maintain a guest registry, and I think that might actually be a very valuable thing to have, is a knowledge of who is occupying these short-term rentals. So maybe the maker of the motion might consider substituting guest registry in number 6.
Okay, Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with Chris, and besides the fact that technology fixes the inspection part anyway, because with enough guests staying in a place, they're going to report on the condition of it, and nobody's going to stay in a place that gets bad reviews anyway, so I wouldn't worry about that part. Most interesting thing to me about that, you said that is what's up here. You said there are 800 and how many?
There are, according to the Booking.com website, it was 826, I think the number.
So it's probably 1,100, maybe, something like that. How many of them are Expedia-owned, Priceline-owned, or TripAdvisor-owned? What's the number?
I don't actually have that number, so you just have to see if you can, I mean, obviously, the red is the Airbnb, so that's.
Yeah, but
looks like the
Airbnb goes
majority.
public next year, and they're raising capital for a reason, so. Do you have any staff at all that knows the percent that are owned by those companies?
Well, we don't have a means of collecting the actual numbers because, again, the platforms, we don't actually collect the transient room tax
Right.
directly. The platforms collect
Pay it at a-
it, and then they tell us what they've collected, and they give us that amount. So we might be able to get a percentage, a proportion for you, but not actual.
That'd be really interesting to know. It's funny too, because like the guy that used to be CEO of Expedia, when they put travel agents out of business, is CEO of Zillow today, and trying to put real estate agents out of business. And it's really interesting to me that the folks dealing with where people travel are also owning companies that deal with how houses are bought and sold. If we thought we had trouble with Uber, trying to get them to comply with local ordinance, that's more interesting to me as a component of this discussion than any of the other parts, how we'll get them to comply if it's a big enough percentage. And Alan's exactly right on part of this, that the university has become an events center. And why in the world wouldn't you turn all the housing around there into the places where people stay when they go to the events? And by the way, we've talked about this before. If we build ADUs all over the place, you can't use those for an owner-occupied. They can't use the rental income as income towards buying that house. They can't qualify for buying that house with a mortgage, using that income from the ADU that they rent. But you can use both incomes, the house and the ADU, if you're buying it as an investment property. So if both of them are going to be rented, you can use both incomes to qualify for the mortgage. And I promise you, that's what the houses around the university are going to be used for.
Okay, Claire.
Thank you. Thank you for the information. So just my main interest in looking at this is to mitigate the negative impacts of these kinds of rentals on adjacent property owners and the neighborhood. You know, without some regulation, including licensing, there is really no effective way for us to do that. So I am supportive of us moving forward with something. But I think in some respects applying, and you've spoken to this a little bit, there's some logic to applying similar standards as we have for motels and hotels in terms of we don't inspect those. But do we require them to keep a guest registry, or is that state regulation?
We don't have a local requirement for guest registries in the hotels or motels.
Okay. But we do have parking requirements?
We do have parking requirements for, yes,
Yeah.
by room.
So anyway, I think it's not all equivalent, but I think thinking about them in that lens can be helpful to us in terms of what we want to do to regulate. So for the most part, I support the things that are in the motion that Councilor Taylor has put on the table, though it's not on this table yet. And like Chris, I'm not so interested in the inspections piece, partly because of the expense and the workload. I think if we have parking requirements and limits on how many people can stay there, I do support the idea of looking at a limit on the number of days a unit can be rented, so it is actually a short-term rental and not a constant rental. I think, we have a complaint-driven system now, and those adjacent neighbors, if people are violating those things, I believe would complain. And as Councilor Clark pointed out, if people stay there and the place is not up to snuff, that will be shared also, whether to us or on the Airbnb platform or whatever platform they rented it from. So I think we should be prescribed and deliberate in how we go about doing this regulating. I think it needs some for sure. And so I'm glad we're getting started on this. And I think for the most part, Councilor Taylor's motion that we'll hear soon gets us started on some right pathways.
Okay, I'm going to give you just 1 minute, but I want to say something. I have a couple of questions. So in your chart, you have suggested that the potential starting point of four aspects of ways in which we might regulate this, and you did not include in that inspections, which we've talked about, separation requirements and requirements for online platforms. So could you just explain why you did not include those in your first round of?
Sure. The separation requirements, again, we could do something like that. It's a little bit difficult to administer, and we just have to be thoughtful because there are several short-term rentals already out there. So we could do something where within a certain number of days, people would have to register, and then after that point in time, no other one could be located within 250 feet, and that might help get at the density issue that Councilor Zelenka was mentioning. With regards to the requirements for online platforms, again, that's something we could do. It would take some time to work that out. The Airbnb did take the city of Portland, I think it was to the Supreme Court, in terms of fighting that. And it's only Airbnb that's currently doing that. So it might help us with compliance for the ones that are registering through there, but again, I'd want to sort of have a conversation about what we want to get out of that, because it's not just Airbnb, there's VRBO and Expedia and the other ones as well. So we'd have to spend some time working out how to get memorandums of understandings with those businesses.
So just a follow-up question for that. There is a sense of urgency I'm feeling in the community and in council that we act on this. And so just my kind of thought for council is if there's some things that we can roll out more quickly and more effectively, council might consider doing that with the understanding that one of the recommendations from the research from the U of O was that this is a good iterative process, that cities roll out a certain number of regulations and then they add or amend them as they see how they work, and that you could consider that instead of throwing all the regulations out there, some of which would take a long time to implement, throw a few out that staff feel they can implement quickly, and then learn from that and then add to it. So just a thought as you consider the motion. Yeah, Alan, Emily hasn't had a chance, so Emily, then Alan, and then Betty.
I'm just wondering, we haven't talked about the basis for license revocation and the complaints and how that would be dealt with. So I'm wondering about that.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's something that we see in some communities that have a specific number of verified complaints within a year's time, then they wouldn't be eligible. We could revoke their permit and they wouldn't be eligible to reapply for another year. So that is something I think that we could pretty easily write into the ordinance. I will note that, again, we would have to make sure they're verified complaints. And so that can be tricky depending on what time of day or over what time of the week those complaints are coming in. But certainly if we have a number of the same place where we're going out a number of different times, it might make some sense to do something like that.
So would that be expensive, like the inspections?
No, because I think it would just be part of our existing compliance program. I mean, obviously, this is going to increase, if we implement this, this is going to increase the staff workload. What we haven't talked about is that there would be a fee associated with the license, and it would be annually renewed, because we'd need to be able to increase our staffing to deal with the increase in complaints.
Well, if we're going to inspect, it seems it would be reasonable for the applicant to pay for that inspection, since they'd be benefiting. So that would take care of that problem. The day limit seems a little strange to me, because if you have an extra place you're renting out and you can only do it 3 months of a year, then we're giving up housing the other 9 months. So I'm a little confused as to the benefit of that overall. Anybody have any ideas?
Well, the room could still be rented out as a regular rental. It would just be the short-term rental that would be limited to the 90 days. So someone could still rent a room out per month. This would only limit someone's ability to do the short-term rental format.
Well, it just seems if I had a bed and breakfast, I probably wouldn't be renting it out by the month. I mean, that seems more like short-term rentals. And unless I could rent it to a student in the year and then Airbnb in the summer. And I'm just a little confused about if we're going to let them do it, why only 90 days? That's less tax income for us, less income for them. And the neighborhood livability is really important to me. If I have 10 Airbnbs on my block, I'm going to notice that a lot more than 2, even if the 2 are rented all the time. So it's just something to think about. Thanks.
Okay, Alan, Mike, and then Betty will put the motion on.
Yeah, a couple of questions and then a comment on the motion. One is, Mike brings up a good point about ADUs, and if neither of them need to be owner-occupied, how does an HB 2001 doesn't allow it to be owner-occupied to have an ADU? Is it the mere fact that this is a short-term rental that allows us to do the owner occupancy and parking, which are both prohibited for ADUs?
Yes.
House Bill 2001 actually had a specific carve-out in their Section 7. So the provision that talks about how owner occupancy and requiring off-street parking are not reasonable reasonable regulations relating to siting and design. They then specifically say, but it doesn't prohibit a local government from regulating vacation occupancies to require owner occupancy or off-street parking. So they were very explicit about giving the authority for y'all to do that.
Another point, the inspection requirement, I agree we don't regulate and do frequent inspections on all different types of housing, but when it starts, we do. So when you build a new house, it gets inspected to make sure that it has the egress and all those other things and that the fire alarms are there and all that kind of things. So maybe the way that you deal with the inspection is if you're going to create a new Airbnb, and maybe we have a backlog of all the existing ones that need to be inspected, but if you're going to create a new one, you have to meet that you have an inspection, that the fees get paid for by the landlord or the owner, and that it gets dealt with in that way. And then all those things are in place, and then we assume that they won't go away because people won't stay there. So maybe instead of, I don't see the equivalency with the guest registry. I don't even know what a guest registry actually accomplishes, but I have a process question about the way that the motion's structured.
It's not on the table yet.
When you put this up, Betty, maybe we don't want to think about this. The way that this is structured is that you're just going straight to a public hearing. Usually what we do is we ask the city manager to bring back an ordinance for our review, then we revise it and think about it, talk about it, and then we send it to a public hearing. It seems like this motion skips a page in that process, so you might want to think about that. And then finally, I don't understand, well, I have a problem with the that number 7, requirements for online platforms, assist in regulations, when we're only potentially capturing maybe a quarter of them are on the platforms. The rest are through Craigslist or whatever. And so that would have limited value to me, I suspect.
Ready? Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm interested in how you will go about the process, or anybody on your staff, of finding out how many homes are owned by, in our city are owned by TripAdvisor, Priceline, or Expedia.
I'm not sure we're proposing to do that.
No, I'm asking you to. I'd like to know, and I don't know the process here, but I'd like to know the answer to that from staff, please.
I think what we'd have to do is figure out how we do that, how much time it takes. I have no idea if that's a 10-minute or a 10-hour.
I don't either, but that's kind of my point here, is how will we enforce this at all with those large companies? I mean, how will we verify, much less enforce?
Well, just getting back to the first question, in order to try and find out where all these are, we would actually have to go to the platform, contact the one that's being advertised and see if we could find out where the address is. And so that's often information that's not, people don't want to give up unless you're actually going to rent it.
Right. The national companies aren't going to play nice, so when
Well, the Airbnb is doing that in Portland now.
for now. When they rent them out for 95 days, how will you know? Or 100
Guest
days?
registry is a way to keep track of that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Betty, your
Thank
moment.
you. And I did ask the city attorney to prepare the motion, so you can speak to her, Alan. You don't like the way it's worded.
There's always two ways to go about it, and you've done it both ways, and it's entirely within your purview. You can either direct the preparing of it and that we schedule the public hearing, or have us draft it and bring it back for council discussion. Completely.
I like the way it is, but anyway, also, I neglected when I spoke before to thank staff for the great information we got in the agenda packet. It was really good information. And we didn't discuss it all tonight, but it was nice to have it. So the motion is, I need my glasses. Move to direct the city manager to schedule a public hearing on an ordinance that amends Chapter 3 to add short-term rental license program, and that includes as part of the license program at least the following items. 1, yearly license fee. 2, owner occupancy requirement. 3, limit on the number of days a unit can be rented. 4, basis for license revocation, including number of complaints per calendar year. 5, minimum separation between short-term rentals. 6, inspection requirements. 7, requirements for online platforms to assist in regulations. And 8, parking requirements.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I'm making my list.
Okay, wait a second. I have Alan, Mike, Chris, and Claire on the queue.
So this isn't uncomplicated. There's a lot of stuff that's packed in here, and I'm not exactly sure what all of they mean, including how many days and things like that. So the way that this is structured, it kind of leaves all that up to staff, that then we'll just be voting on something that the staff proposed. So as a friendly, instead of schedule a public hearing on, I would suggest draft and bring back to council for deliberation an ordinance. So then we could find out all the details about what all this means.
I don't object, except that I think there's some urgency for us to do something
I agree.
before it becomes a big problem here, as it is in many other places.
Absolutely agree with that.
Are you
So-
accepting the friendly?
Well, does it say how soon they bring it?
Well, as soon as,
I'm worried
as
about
possible.
delaying.
Well, you want to add something like, in all due diligence, or as fast as possible? I mean, you still have to schedule it.
You still have to,
With all due haste.
How about before the end of the year?
yeah, before the end of the year. That
Before the
seemed,
end of the year, I was thinking way sooner than that.
We have other things to do.
I'll accept that if you want to do that.
Before the end of the year. You mean have the whole thing done by the end of the year?
Bring it back to us, yes.
Bring back the
bring
draft.
back the draft. Staff has to
That's
craft
easy,
it.
yeah.
Staff has to craft it after all.
I'll accept that, and I guess the second will, since he's the
Right?
second.
He pulled a David Kelly there. Did you see that?
Right,
That was nice. That was.
okay,
Bring back a draft before the end of the year.
before the end of the year, okay. Mike,
Back to draft before the end of the year.
so,
I don't believe that we need items 5 or 6. I think they are superfluous to the point and will take us off track and aren't going to regulate anything important. So, excuse me. I don't think they will effectively alter what we come up with in the most important pieces. So I would move to remove 5 and 6 to keep us on a better track.
Second that.
any other discussion about that? Want to approve the motion to remove 5 and 6?
Which is spacing and
Spacing and.
and inspections.
And inspections. Ready to vote on that motion? All in favor of removing those two? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Opposed? 3. Okay, that passes. Okay, so those get, for now, dropped. Okay. All right, Chris?
Alan has already made the suggestion I was going to make, so I'm really supportive of bringing back a draft.
Okay, great. Claire?
Thanks. So one of the things I was going to say was just taken off the list. And I think this is a topic and there is urgency in the community, but I think we need to make sure that we have time to hear both from people who offer these rentals and from those who have experienced the negative effects. And so I'm glad we've changed the motion to not go directly to a public hearing, to allow more time for conversation and for the public to give us input. I'm hoping we can strike a good balance between those two potentially competing interests. I think there's value in the community to allowing people to use their property in this way, but it can't be allowed to occur in such a way that it really undermines the ability of permanent residents to enjoy their homes in their neighborhoods. And that's what I hear my fellow counselors speaking to as well. The one point I meant to bring up in the other round was we're not looking here at the idea of creating a land use permit process for a home that could be used as a short-term rental. And maybe we start with these now and then see where, what kind of public input we get. But there may be space for us to want to consider that down the road. I noticed in the AIS that, staff said that other cities have considered these regulations a work in progress, that they're always kind of reviewing the impacts and considering new ways to work with these kind of home-based businesses is basically what they are. And so, we'll take our first stab at it and see where we go, but we'll probably be revisiting this in years to come. So, thank you.
Greg?
Yeah, I got a question on this. Can we add a licensure fee that could support the administration of this?
Yes.
We can.
Yeah, we would, I would imagine what we would do is set the fee to pay for the cost of administering the program, so yes.
Right, okay. So I would like to add that to the motion if we could.
Yeah, it'll.
Oh, it is?
Number one, yearly license fee.
Okay.
That covers the
I
cost.
best.
Okay,
Yeah.
Right, got it.
Which would.
Okay. Mike,
Did we leave in the part we did about soliciting? Could you give me the exact word when it comes to technology companies?
Online platforms.
online platforms to assist in, requirements for online platforms to assist in regulations.
One of the other pieces that's going to involve that is all the iBuyer programs that are coming out now, like Zillow is buying homes in a lot of markets, and so is Realtor.com, and a bunch of them as the interim step to try and alter how that market operates, where they'll be, I can't imagine they won't be renting them in that period between a purchase and a sale, so that they have cash flow. We may want to expand the language there, or at least have staff look into the idea of how does this take into account not just the platforms that are intentionally renting them as their ongoing business model, but the ones that are buying and selling homes intentionally without the realtors in the process, that are going to have a motivation to rent them on a short-term basis.
Would those be owner occupied, Councilor Clark? Would that be, they wouldn't be owner occupied, so if that was,
But if they're not, how would you know it? And if they decided to rent them for a short period of time in between the purchase and the sale, how would you know it? And, so it's going to take place. My question is, we need to be prepared for what the technology is going to be capable of doing that's going to impact the neighbors that we don't yet, that happen in those models in other cities right now.
Okay, are we ready for a vote? Okay, all in favor, as amended? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Excellent, it passes. Thank you very much. That was excellent staff work, wonderful report.
Good job.
And we are adjourned. Well done.
On time.
Well done. Yep, well done.